So what I'd like to do is illustrate some of the challenges in very basic relationship dynamics. So the first thing to understand is that each of us has a pattern. And this pattern is unique. This pattern is unique to each person. But this is the signature of self, and this creates the potential for an attuned flow to be going back and forth. So we have this flow going back and forth. And in a positive, healthy relationship, this flow of energy back and forth is attuned, meaning in landscape design terms, if you have a little dot here, and then you have a giant force here, and you try and dance, for example, the masses are so unattuned that the experience of this dot will be dominant. Now the same is true if you have a very tiny dot over here. It's not about absolute size, it's about relative size. And this is the case in all forms of energy, whether it's sound. If your ear is at a 50% sensitivity calibration, and you get a 1000% sound, this is a 20-fold difference in attunement. The sound will feel violent as opposed to musical, regardless of the nature of the sound, because it's out of attunement. And so we have this basic structure of healthy, attuned energy going back. But then something happens that's an inevitable part of our culture. And it's the genocide of the wound. And it happens for every one of us to varying degrees. But in the genesis of the wound, you have a new signature that comes in, and it comes in at an overwhelming level. It's out of scale because it's a signature born of the culture. Now this signature, because of its intensity, because we are interconnected, we are interdependent. Because we are interdependent, anything with a large mass capable of destroying us is something that we automatically show deference to by internalizing this energy, because this energy that's the wound is bigger than we are as an individual. It is a wound carried in the cult of each of our cultures. It is, for example, if this is a man and we are coming in with this full spectrum of masculine and feminine energy, of all kinds of different creative and beautiful ways of attuning, and yet this energy says, no, that's not a man. Men don't have sensitivity. Men don't have feelings. Men don't respond emotionally. Men don't care. And this has a lot of backing. And it's important to understand, where is this backing coming from, since cultures are sustained purely as human artifacts. Why are all of these adults in this culture maintaining the shape of the cultural wound, the violation of the innate energy signatures we're coming into? And there's a couple of reasons for that. One of which is self-perpetuating, because this wound, this black triangular shape that's entering the energy field, is a trauma, because the message contained within the arrival of this energy field inside of our own energy signature is the following. Number one, this is the way things are done. Number two, if you don't like it, tough. See, that's what makes it a violation. It's not just that it's a significantly heavier, denser, bigger form, because millions of people have held this form for generations, and your energy signature is coming in as a singular energy signature that's at a very fragile stage of development. This energy signature is very well developed, and it's sustained by many people. So when it has the message tough, and you are in, as a child, an interconnected state and an interdependent state, you need the alliance with the people who are holding this shape in order to survive. And the carrot that comes with this message is, look, kid, you may not like all of this shape. Granted, I didn't either. But this is the way life is. Now, if you will shut up and put up and cooperate with this shape, you can feel miserable, you can feel despair, you can be exhausted, you can be lonely, you can feel helpless. That's okay. But you can't talk about it, and here are some perks. We will let you belong and meet one of your most basic needs. We will accept you. We will support you to the degree that you foster this shape. Now, why do we make this deal with you? Because it is a deal. Like, what's in it for all of these individuals at back of this energy shape? Well, there's a lot in it. But one of the most interesting things that's in it is that each adult has had this shape rammed into them at a young age in a traumatic way. They've had this shape rammed into them, and they've been absolutely terrified for their lives. And the shape has felt foreign. The shape has felt unknown. And it has been terrifying. And when you have an overwhelmingly large shape of energy that is terrifying and not attuned, ram into you, and you cooperate with it in order to survive, one of the byproducts of that experience is a fear of the unknown. meaning 99.999% of all reality is unknown. You could even say it's unknown, because it's so big we don't even know that we don't know. It's literally beyond our human capacity to conceptualize that we don't know it, because we'd have to know it a little bit in order to know that we didn't know it. Now, when at an early age, one of the biggest foreign objects, or several of the biggest foreign objects entering our field, is profoundly hostile, but offers an olive branch of, you go along with this and we'll help each other out. It creates a deep fear of the unknown. Maybe the whole unknown out there is filled with these dark objects, and we don't want to go into an unknown that is hostile. And one of the things about the cult of the cultural wound is that it is known. Every single person knows it. And this creates a bond of belonging, number one. Number two, it creates certainty. Now, certainty is very valuable for a population that is afraid of the unknown. Because certainty is known. The devil you know versus the devil you don't. The devil you know versus the angel you don't know. So this shape of the wound delivers certainty. It delivers shared empathy in the suffering of the shape. It is a miserable shape. There are very, very few cultural artifacts that do not involve a great deal of suffering for the individual, and a great deal of limitation for the individual. But they do offer bonding. You go to a school, you're beaten, your friends are beaten, you're feeling lonely and homesick, they're feeling lonely and homesick. There is a bonding in the wound, a sense of being known. We can be known through beauty and pain. It's a core human need to be known. This wound offers that possibility. And a final gift of the wound is efficiency. Now, what do I mean by this? This shape has many facets. One of our Western shapes in the cult of culture is, how you doing? I'm fine. How you doing? Great. Now, this means absolutely nothing. And you could say that's part of the wound. A lack of integrity, a lack of integration between our deepest feelings and our words, our deepest feelings and our facial expressions. So this is actually part of the wound. It's the wound separates us from who we are. But it is profoundly efficient, and it is profoundly certain. Because how many rude assholes have the audacity, when you say, how you doing, to say, well, let me tell you, let's sit down for 2 or 3 hours and we'll go through it point by point. It's like, no, you're not playing the cultural game. You're not playing by the rules. And the rules say, I can ask that question because you've only got 2 seconds to respond. So even if I don't know, I only have, and don't want to know your answer, I only have to put up with it for 1 to 10 seconds because you've got to follow that rule. Now, why? Because that's what this shape dictates. It has nothing to do with you. It has nothing to do with me. It's what the shape dictates. Now, all of this is what I call the wound. And we've each experienced it. Now, the wound itself is traumatizing, and we are in an emotionally illiterate culture that does not understand trauma enough to heal it. It actually uses trauma and the threat of trauma, shame being a key trauma in interdependent species, to shame someone, to put them on the outside, to threaten them with not belonging to the good group, to the sanctioned group, to the welcome group. This is a core trauma to our biology, knowing that we depend on one another. And so in this exploration, we have two wounds that cut us to the core, but that we must cooperate with in order to survive. Now, the amount of pain that is in our energy signature to house this foreign, clunky, crude, historic cultural object built in massive levels of ignorance, fear, antiquity, it is a bizarre hunk of an object, and it's no fun at all. However, part of the object's defense structure, part of what keeps the object alive, is that no one can talk about it. If they do, they're breaking the taboo of the wound. So, part of the deal is you can't talk about this wound, because to talk about it is to actually bring some of your energy back into its space, because to talk about it is your voice. I feel this. I don't like this. This hurts. All of that is reasserting the you. See, because the only thing that's tolerated in this wound is silence. Silence and silence about the silence, because to say this is a silent secret is to reveal a part of its nature. So the real key in this dynamic is silence, is not to talk, is not to exist. And if we do talk, we break the contract and we run the risk of being sabotaged and attacked. Now, why would nice, healthy, normal people sabotage us and attack us for talking about our wound? Well, there's a couple of answers. Number one is we're not just talking about our wound. We're talking about their wound. We're talking about, so there's a couple of rules here that are good to know. One of them is when I talk about my wound, I talk about our wound. See, it's not just my wound. It has very little to do with me or my energy signature. It's our wound. So when I talk about my wound, I talk about our wound. Well, why is that upsetting to a population that is wounded and burdened by that wound? You can look at it in childhood dynamics where one sibling decides to talk to dad about the impact of his drunkenness, his lasciviousness, his rage, and just the full impact on them. Now, one of the things you'll often see in a sibling dynamic is that the other siblings will come to dad's rescue. They will say, no, it's no big deal, Dad. stop making trouble, dad has a hard life, they will cover it up, and they will actually be quite angry, not at dad, not at the wound, but they will be angry at the person talking about it. Why? Because they're talking about our wound, which means that if I'm talking about my feelings, I'm also talking about the feelings you and they are likely to have if you uncover and explore the wound. Well, these are not pleasant feelings, number one, but the much deeper issue is the contract with the wound. We each made a deal with this wound and with the bearers of this wound growing up to be silent about it in order to protect the shame, to protect what was not authentic. Because every single person in this world who gives us a piece of this wound is violating their own energy signature in order to do it. Remember that picture that we come in with. We come in with this very sensitive, very unique energy signature that's just ours, and in that sense it has a very small mass. It's like a radio station that's just able to broadcast for a few feet around it. But this radio station gets jammed by a massive broadcast center that has billions of dollars behind it, and a whole layer of people capitalizing it, and this energy signature gets drowned out. And there's a lot of different vested interests in maintaining the dominance of the cultural wound, from corporate interests. But the biggest single force is trauma itself. Trauma, which is a phenomena that comes out of the wound, is also an experience of the wound. Now, this is a very important part of the whole matrix, because within the brain there is a traumatic center and a traumatic response, and it's a deep survival program, and it has 3 or 4 key parts. One is fight. My life is in danger. That's the essence of trauma. My life is in danger. My life is in danger, number 1. Number 2, no one is coming to my rescue, meaning I'm on my own. I have to depend on this deep program in my brain, because as the life-threatening situation, which could be a shame, which could be an ostracization, shame, which could be a belief in a future that has no place for me, death. It could be a death of identity, like I need to feel important, to feel like I have a right to exist, and I don't feel any of that importance. All the messages from the outside are that I'm unimportant. And so there is a threat, number 1. Number 2, no one is responding to the threat in a way that gives me confidence the threat will subside. Number 3, my emotion, my empathic emotion, starts to overwhelm and malfunction and get in the way of decisive action. Number 4, the traumatic portion of the brain gets activated, and I assess the situation to will my prospects increase if I fight, if I run, going back to our ancestors of being predated upon. We're only 100,000 years out of the trees. And we also have freeze. This goes into, again, animal behavior in prey environments, fight, flight, freeze. And then we have one more kind of mechanism, which is called dissociation. Now, when we dissociate, we're here, thinking, feeling, tasting, touching, all of this. We are in this movie. We're present for our immediate surroundings in our body. Now, when we cannot control these immediate surroundings and they appear to offer, life and death traumatic centers, when the traumatic portion of the brain activates, one of the things that often gets in the way is the overloading scream. It's kind of like the smoke detector that's alerting you gets so loud that you can't move and escape the fire. And so we have another mechanism, and it's called dissociation. Now what we do here is we take a portion of our consciousness that will reduce some of this overwhelm, and we put it out here, out of this environment. We disconnect it, and we say, this is me. I feel nothing. I'm fine, whatever. And this is designed to get us through the survival trauma. Now, anyone who has encountered this wound that we talked about has gone through trauma and dissociation, because the wound is that painful. It's literally, viscerally, taking between 1/3 and 90% of all of our potential, all of our nature, all of our range, all of our possibility, and eliminating it. Just crunching that probability field down by an enormous amount that could be called an internal genocide. Because, just to give a very small sense of our range, every single person on the planet today might have been born in any of 10,000 cultures. Now, if you read and do deep anthropology and mythology, you start to see that, there have been matriarchal and patriarchal cultures. There have been warrior cultures, lover cultures. There have been psychedelic cultures. There have been tribunal, cultures. There have been literary cultures. There have been every kind of expression of who we are as a humanity imaginable. And yet we, in our culture, are existing in a very, very tiny sliver of all that possibility. And the reason is very simple, that this wound commands it. It says, if you want to belong, if you want to be accepted and respected rather than hated, sabotaged, envied, reviled, fit into this box. Now, when I talk about my wound, I talk about your wound. When I talk about my feelings, I talk about your feelings. Now, what's the threat of you feeling your feelings about the wound? Well, one of the biggest threats is that all the parts of you that feel terrified, angry, annoyed, irritable, disgusted with, frustrated with the wound, will rebel. Will say, wait a minute, I don't want to be part of this wound. This does really hurt. Why am I doing this? This is a very natural human question because you are reasserting your energy back into the geographic terrain occupied by the energy pattern of the wound, of the cult, of culture. Now, why is this risky for you? Why does this traumatize you? Because at a very young age, pre-verbally, you faced this dilemma before, where parts of you were screaming, no, don't take this part away from me. This part is beautiful. What's wrong? What's so bad about me that when I sing as a man tenderly, I'm being lacerated culturally? I don't get it. But these voices had to be exterminated for your cultural acceptance, your cultural survival. And you knew at a young age. Maybe you were getting bullied or about to be bullied unless you joined this clique of the wound. You absolutely knew at a young age that you had to buy in to some degree in some way in order to survive. You had to deny this voice. Now, the person who is healing the wound is bringing you back into that stage of choice. It's reawakening that choice. It's returning the cycle to the point in our psychic geography where we're making that choice. And every single thing in our abusers and the people around us bodies is saying, no, no. Now, why are they doing that? Because their body is telling them their life is in danger. And you are the threat. You who have the audacity to bring your feelings back into this terrain of the cult, of the wound. You who have the audacity to question. I mean, why do Christians salivate, foam at the mouth, burn at the stake? People who question some of the more absurd narratives in aspects of their religion. It's because part of the traumatic experience for many, like when I grew up and was read the Old Testament at age 5, I'm a small person with an abusive giant reading me a book about an even bigger abusive giant. My dad might tie me up in a sack and drag me around. My dad might humiliate me. My dad might pull my ear or beat me. But this guy, he sets his people up on tests. He asks people like my dad to bring their kids to a stone rock and then tells them to cut their kid in half. And the dad just lifts up the sword, prepares to cut his kid in half, and then God says, well, you've passed the test. So today you don't have to cut your kid in half. I mean, this is the kind of sick wound that we're dealing with. And you don't want to get on the wrong side of that guy. It is a fear and trauma-based narrative. You don't want to burn in a lake of fire. You don't want to be condemned without food. You don't want to be hated and despised. You don't want to be looked down on by all the righteous people who are so much better than you and are the good people. You want to be up there in the good people. See, this is the essence of the wound. Every cult says the same thing. Put up with our weird stuff, or we will torture and burn you and kill you and not want you and reject you and because you're different than us. And you're different from us, not because there's anything wrong with you, not because the person you were born as wasn't and isn't beautiful. You're different because you haven't yet accepted the domain of the wound inside your energy field. And you're taking other people empathically into that domain that's still virgin inside them, that little bit of geography in the birthing process where they haven't yet been violated fully by the wound. And to feel that beauty and that innocence and that truth, and then relate that to the horror, the mediocrity, the abuse of the present day, is a contrast that elicits enormous pain. And that pain is dangerous to the status quo. You know, what's the status quo in war? The United States, as a country, Christian country of peace, love, and all, can burn men, women, and children alive in Vietnam, with the majority not doing anything to stop it. Because of all this and that, there's all these weird power calculations and paradigms and all that. And it's like, it doesn't matter what the logic is. There's something off with a wound structure that is built around the idea that because a foreign country might vote to be communist, just look at the word commune, communist, share their resources, be equal, because they might do that. There wasn't racism in the Soviet Union in the way there still is in the United States, but because they might do that, we need to kill 50,000 young men of our own, and we need to defoliate the environment. We need to burn innocent trees. We need to put more CO2 into the atmosphere to stop this horrible thing of these people choosing to be communal in their own way, in their own country. And when that's not enough, we've got to burn with napalm, specifically created to burn human beings alive. And then we've got to be unemotional about it. Well, what is that? What is the definition of a human being that can drop burning flames on a pregnant woman and burn up her house while her children weeps and feel absolutely nothing? The dictionary categorizes that as someone in a sociopathic state or as a terrorist because they are inducing terror, massive amounts of terror. So one of the most interesting aspects of how wounds sustain themselves, it's not only through silence and various brainwashing, but it's through language. We just rewrite those words. We don't say this is burning an innocent woman alive. We say this is a casualty of war. And we say that casualties are not human beings, they're just casualties. And we say, well, who cares? I mean, that's still a human being. And we say, no, it's been going on for centuries, so it's okay. So this is the way we use language. And going back to this question, so the first reason people are upset when we start expressing our emotion about the wound, when I talk about my wound, I'm talking about your wound. When I'm talking about my feelings, I'm talking about your feelings. The feelings might lead you to reconsider your alliance to the wound, because it is an alliance. It is an alliance. The United States military, as an example, is hosted by a number of countries around the world. Some of it is carrot, we're going to do this and that and we'll protect you if you get hosted by us. Others is stick, you don't want to be our enemy. You're with us or you're against us. This is the language of the wound. You are with us or you're against us. Do you really want the full weight of this giant energetic object, fueled by the fears, ignorances, terrors, and forced loyalty of millions of people aimed at you, with you as the enemy? That is a terrifying and lonely and traumatic event. And so we fall in line. It's like, good, good, that's what we want, good. You know, in Star Wars, the feel your anger, good. You're coming over to the dark side. It's why these films are so mythologically potent. It's the relationship and the encounter with the wound in every single one of us, given to us by the Father, the Great Father, the God in the culture. There is not a single religion present today that is matriarchal, that honors the goddess. There are very few countries that honor feminine energy in men or women as much as masculine energy. This is part of the wound imbalance. And it is an absurd imbalance. Meaning, any scientist who was charged with creating a battery, who made the positive or masculine pole of the battery 5 times bigger than the negative pole of the battery, thus effectively reducing the electrical flow within the battery by 80%, would be sacked for the waste of opportunity, for the waste of energy. Any culture that elevates either the masculine or the feminine, disproportionate to its equal counterpart, is creating the same level of waste. But far from sacking the culturalists who manufacture these absurdly unsustainable imbalances, we elevate them because we've used language to be so self-referencing that we just say masculine energy is good, therefore what is masculine is good, therefore more masculine energy is good, and you created more masculine energy, therefore that's good. Well, what about the loss of flow? What about the loss of beauty? What about the loss of potential? Well, that must be bad. Meaning potential must be bad because we know this is good. It's a self-referencing logic that is not willing to make itself subservient to an external goal or value. Because as soon as you say, what is the quickest path to beauty, or what is the quickest path to love, or what is the most sustainable relationship with the planet, as soon as you reference an objective goal and look at it scientifically, you see we need an equal balance of masculine and feminine energy. That is the quickest path towards those goals. So we just don't name those goals. We define ourselves by the wound, by the imbalance. This is who we are. No one is going to tell us what to do, i.e., we're sick and no one's going to talk about it, or we're going to infect them with our disease and make them even more miserable than we are and call it who we are. It's very barbaric. We are in a barbaric state of existence. But because it's normal, and because we get in trouble for naming it, we don't. We take the bait. Among other things, the money bait. I just lost a $60,000 job because I had the audacity to talk about some of this with my client. And there's a balance in this prostitution with the wound. There's a balance because every human being in a body is interdependent. A government can throw you out of their country. A police force can set its sight on you. A group of people, a gang, there's all kinds of people that get very upset when you break the status quo. So going back to why, so number one, you might lead to them falling in step with your rebellion and getting in equal trouble. You also upset people for being inefficient about being different. So isn't it nice, for example, that all the cell phones are coming with these C port chargers? More and more phones are coming with this kind of standardized charger. And it means that you can charge it with this charger, with that charger. You can buy a new phone and all your old chargers work. It's wonderful. But as soon as you get one phone that comes with a completely unique charger, now all your chargers are wasted. Now you have to go out and find, and then what if that charger is hard to find? It's awkward. It's like, It's like being the only one with a hydrogen car and no fuel cell stations around. It's awkward. It's not that there's anything bad about having a hydrogen car. We may absolutely need it to survive. Nothing bad with having an electric car. We may absolutely need it to reduce smog. Yet when there are no charging ports, when your friend arrives with the electric car and has to run an extension cord through your windows, and you're worried about your plants being stepped on and this and that, and the status quo is being disrupted. So you have to think. Maybe you didn't think. You run the extension cord through the window for the first time. They're charging their car. Then a kid pulls the extension cord and your $3,000 vase, which was in the path of the extension cord, rattles and falls. Now, who's going to pay for that? Your kids? But you think, damn it, if that asshole hadn't had to show off and get an electric car and plug his damn thing in here and do this, he's always trying to be different, this wouldn't have happened. My $3,000 vase, I wouldn't have to be thinking who should pay for this. I mean, this is upsetting. My life was convenient when my friends pulled up in their gas guzzlers. And so there's a very real inefficiency that comes with change. If you don't say, how you doing? I'm fine, but say, would you like the 10-minute, the 30-minute, or the 3-day answer? And would you like to know about my trauma, or would you like to know about the business deal I just closed? It's like, even that's too much information. Just say fine. Okay, good. Now get out of here. I have no interest in you whatsoever. This is disruptive. Now, who wants to be the one being glared at by every single person for not saying fine? Who wants to be the only one in the company who isn't wearing the uniform? Who wants to be the only student who doesn't know the answer to some absurd question that is completely irrelevant, and instead wants to be busily reading an audiobook on something important? Who wants to be the odd one out? When being the odd one out often leads to social ostracization and trauma. When being different leads to more energy consumption in the short term. See, the truth is we are on an endless path of change, and whether it is, Henry Ford introducing the electric cars when the pundits at the time assured everyone that no one would possibly use cars because horses were much more efficient, or assured people that people couldn't fly, or assured people that public education was a wonderful idea, or assured people that having Medicare is every single change in history, every invention, from the clunky cell phones in the 80s with $1 a minute. It's like, who's ever going to buy those? They cost $1,000, they cost $1 a minute, they're terrible, they're awkward. Why wouldn't you just go to a home phone? See, every single change throughout history has been brought about inefficiently and disruptively by a small minority. And it has been fought tooth and nail by the majority. Skeptical, disinterested, unsupportive, irritated, shaming, critical. You wouldn't believe the amount of horror, betrayal, abandonment, lies, disgust, disgrace, criticism, scorn heaped on Elon Musk before he succeeded at revolutionizing 3 industries: solar, electric cars, and rocketry. He is still, though far less, met with an enormous amount of resistance to some of his ideas and ambitions. It's just now, as one of the richer people in the world with a very proven success record, his unique energy signature is given more respect. But don't think for a moment that he's free of the wound. When he shows up in a suit and tie, that's not his signature. That's the cultural norm. When he doesn't talk about this and does talk about this, that's not who he is. That's what's required to be considered professional in a business, etc. And so there's this dance. There's always this dance with the context, with the cult of culture, with the wound. But innovators of any kind have to break the rules. They have to talk about it. And, as Elon Musk did when every single person told him he was an idiot to start a rocket business, is he used physics. He broke every single component in a rocket down. He said, we've got about $10,000 worth of raw materials here to make a rocket. What turns it into $1 billion enterprise is that these $10,000 worth of materials are shipped around the globe hundreds of times, upsold, refined, done this and that and the other. And his job and his goal was to find a more efficient way of turning roughly $10,000 worth of raw materials into a rocket in-house. And that's exactly what he did. And so it's important to understand this terrain. And this is all in the context of understanding why you cannot expect support from within the cult, from within the culture, from within the norm, as you seek to reassert yourself into these domains. Now, if we go back to the wound here, and let's see here. If we go back to the wound here and the object, This is all in the second part of who we are. We're our own authentic energy signature. We are the host of the wound that is not us, but that is hosted by us for all these different reasons. Not to mention the fact that people are making billions of dollars on first wounding you to a point where you lose self-confidence, and then telling you you have to buy this car, you have to do this to regain self-confidence. It's an enormous marketing opportunity, because one of the biggest scams that goes on with the wound is having inserted it into our energy field and demanded that we comply with it. The wound has the audacity to turn around and say, this is who you are. This ugliness that is now a part of you is not me. It's not all these scared people around you. It's you. Well, this is one of the biggest frauds in history. A massive triangle of poison is inserted into the mental, emotional, and biological field of the person through the traumatic mechanism, causing intense amounts of pain, reaction, this and that and the other. And everyone around you tells you that this is who you are. It's not who you are. It is who you become when a huge black triangle flies into your field and threatens to kill you if you don't comply. That's who you react to become, but it's not you. Which brings me to the third element in the conversation of, what's present here. And this is the defense strategy. Now, if you think you can remain completely conscious, at ease, centered, and empathic, meaning emotionally present, when you've got a giant triangular disc shoved into your mental, emotional, energetic field upon pain of death, you're dumber than I give you credit for. What is required when we are reduced to this level of pain, shock, trauma is a defense strategy. Now, the defense strategy is actually in defense of the wound and our survival in partnership with it. It is not a defense for our core energy signature. The defense strategy has to do a couple of things. Number one, it has to mask the wound for our protection, because if we talk about it, we get slaughtered by other people that don't want all those repercussions: inefficiency, empathy, having to examine their own issues, being scared of being punished, all that. So we've got to develop a defense strategy that will hide our relationship with the wound and thus protect the wound in its inserted place. Now, we do this in a couple of ways. First of all, we've got to numb some of the emotion because it's absolute agony. So dissociation becomes a really big part of the defense strategy. What are you feeling? Oh, nothing. I don't know. Well, how is it that you're a totally sentient, present human being, born with all these senses and perceptions and imagination, and you're not fully alive with feeling? I don't know that either. This fog is all part of the defense. But how do you get someone to be that foggy when they come up in with, you look at a baby's eyes, they are so present. It's astounding. It's like, how do you get that amount of presence reduced to the resigned, depressive, defiant look of someone who is determined not to know and not to be caught up and found out in their determination not to be known, and basically trying to evade every effort to become conscious in a whole host of internalized lies, avoidances, feigned busynesses that we manufacture just to make sure we don't have any time to examine our feelings and the like. How do we do it? Well, one is dissociation, where we just take the enormous pain of that wound and we send it off away from our field and we partition it. We build walls where behind here we're screaming, behind here we're lonely, behind here we're desperate, behind here we are absolutely in agony. But over in here, everything's fine. I got my work quota done. I walked my 3,000 steps. I doing my little checklist. Everything's fine. Everything's fine. Everything's fine. And the culture is right there to assure you, look, you've got 300 more pieces of paper, what we call money. That means you're a success. You've got a good tan on your body, you've got that, you've got this, you've got a nice BMW, you've got this, you've got that, you've got this. You are a successful person. Well, why do I have these nightmares of screaming? Why do I have this dull ache that is so terrifying that I drink myself into a stupor? Oh, that's just normal. That's just normal. Everyone has, I wouldn't talk about that with any representation of the wound, your boss, your parents. I wouldn't tell them any of that, but that is just what we all do. Here, let me make you a hot chocolate. Isn't that better? In other words, let's protect and avoid going into any of those dark places. And please lie to me, and please tell me that everything is going to be okay. See, and there's a bit of a paradox here, because out beyond the wound, everything is okay. The only thing that's really fucking things up is this antiquated, silent, secret, unregulated, massive energy shape that's built up with the fears and rages and stuff of traumatized people for millennia, shattering into our energy field at birth and being told, adopt this, or be shamed and lonely forever, take it or leave it, you got no time to decide, you're my child. Okay, it's in, let's do this pre-verbally so you don't remember the decision. Let's just cram this thing into you. That's really the only thing wrong. There is no lack of money. There is no lack of food. There is no lack of land to grow food. There are no lack of bodies to make beautiful love with. There are no lack of wonderful flowers to grow, and there is no lack of heaven probability on this planet, except for this giant object and its many ripple effects. Because once you partition the parts that are beautiful, the parts that know who you are, and you hide them, and you forget, and you are told by the wound, you are a dog-eat-dog person, you are a kill-or-be-killed person, you've got to do this or they're going to take it from you, life's the. Once you insert all of that, and you get even a small percentage of the population to adopt that wound, then that percentage goes out on, the Vikings or whatever. You may be living peacefully in your energy signature, and then the Vikings show up absolutely clear. They've got to kill or be killed, plunder and rage and whatever, and because they're not connected with their essential energy field, because they weren't just told we're allowed to be nice human beings. It's like, no, you have to be a Viking. Well, what's that? Well, that's someone that sails around the ocean in cold, miserable waters, raping and killing people and taking their stuff. And then what do we do then? Well, we haul it back to horribly frozen countries that are the traumatic countries that turned us into Vikings in the first place. Because when you wake up and your friend's dead because it's too cold, and you've got a glacier descending on your house, you get so traumatized, you lose sense of who you are, and in that terrified, fearful state, let's develop a culture of Vikings. Let's take what other people have, and then let's bring it all back to our horrible country, and be re-traumatized. I mean, it's you. One of the things that you learn in this dynamic is that the most sociopathic species, or the most sociopathic race, or the most sociopathic culture, is the culture that is most disconnected from itself, which is then the culture that does the most harm to itself and to others without realizing it. Why? Because it's in a dissociative place, which is not empathic. It's the opposite of empathy. Empathy tells you how you are impacting other people. Empathy tells you how you are impacting other people. And so if you're in an empathic state, how can you respond except by caring for other people? It doesn't feel good, because when you're in an empathic state, you know what they're feeling. And when you feel okay, because you respect your own feelings, and then you feel what other people feel, and then you notice you're hurting someone, you stop. But when you're in a sociopathic state, you don't notice you're hurting yourself. You don't feel any connection with other people. You have the illusion of them suffering is good for you in some little way, because you're in a using dynamic. That's part of the sociopathic state. And you go and create trauma for other people, which then creates a sociopathic state for them. Trauma is the formation of a sociopathic state. So ultimately, we don't get peace as a species unless we are committed to recognizing the traumatic pattern and healing trauma as a species, where the only thing that matters is, oh, so-and-so has just been traumatized. An earthquake just ruined their house and did this and that and the other. So-and-so has just been traumatized. They're now in a vulnerable place of a sociopathic state. It's time to engage our cultural commitment to bring healing and restore health and the core energy signature of that person. That's our primary responsibility as a country and a cult, is to restore the core essence of each person back to themselves, and to cooperate to protect them from trauma. Trauma that would lead to a sociopathic state. Now, this actually generates an astounding amount of abundance. Because when you have people who are empathic, educated, communicate effectively, and love themselves, these people are the safest, most fun, enjoyable people on the planet today. Now, when you have a whole planet of these people, you don't need police. You don't need armies. See, because an army and police and walls and boundaries and locks and all that are for one thing: to protect you from people in a sociopathic state. The only thing that produces a sociopathic state is trauma. And the only thing that allows it to continue is a world in which people are allowed to be traumatized, i.e., the US sends drone in to blow up wedding, traumatizes an entire group of people, does not send in any therapists and healing and grievers or any explanation, just disappears. An entire village is left in varying states of PTSD. These are the states in which revenge, PTSD, trauma, dissociation, and ultimately the sociopathic state emerge. They bloom in the presence of violation and violence, and they heal in the presence of empathy and caring. But it has to be, trauma is a very, very, very deep primal emotion. Remember, it's a life and death perception, which means that if you are in trauma, it requires an incredibly stable and consistent protocol and witnessing around you to leave that traumatic state. That's just what is required. So we have the defense strategy. So one of it is dissociation. Another is in the dissociated state, doing the abuse that was done to you. That can be a defense. Another can be distancing from people. So I'm feeling terror because I'm getting close to you and you're bringing up emotions that remind me of a certain trauma. So I'm going to dissociate myself from you. I'm going to put a wall. Now, the important thing to understand is, the defense structure to protect the wound is deep, it's thorough, and it has one objective, one loyalty: to stop the feelings associated with the wound. To stop the feelings associated with the wound. Now, one of those feelings is helplessness. A massive object is coming in from the cult. I don't want to take it. It feels horrible, but I'm going to die if I don't. It's a state of complete helplessness. So one of the biggest feelings we're committed to not feeling as we protect the wound is helplessness. Now, what creates an illusion of medicine for helplessness? Control, domination, addiction. Addiction is a distraction that is so potent it distracts from all emotion. So this wall is really a wall of compulsion because it's not loyal to the other person. It's not loyal to our own energy field. It's not even directly loyal to the wound, though if it had any loyalty, it is. Its loyalty is to not feel the helplessness of accepting and internalizing the wound, and the helplessness of trauma, and the helplessness of terror, and the helplessness of fear. This is the core shape. Now, the reason it's a wall between you and your partner is that its loyalty is not to the partner, and its loyalty is not to the relationship. Its loyalty is not to the third energy created by the relationship. Because here's one of the most beautiful aspects of here's one of the most beautiful aspects in a relationship, which is that whenever two people's energy signatures come together in a harmonic of attunement, you have a third energy. Now this is, the gem, the jewel in the crown, the crystalline baby. It's much bigger than the energy of one person alone. It's much bigger than you. It's much bigger than me. It's the third energy, and it's absolutely beautiful. So your energy signature, your core energy, my energy signature, my core energy, coming together to create this third energy. It's beautiful. There's just one problem. The wound is not a friend to this third energy. The wound is profoundly hostile to this third energy, and makes an effort to infect it, number one. And number two, the strategy to protect our own overwhelm from the intense pain of the wound destroys our own energy signature, violates it, destroys your energy signature, is not attuned to it, is not loyal to the third energy, actively cannibalizes it. And in doing this, it betrays the relationship, because the biggest issue is not sexual infidelity, that all comes. The biggest issue of betrayal is that every single person, when there is unresolved trauma, will compulsively do whatever it takes to avoid feeling the feelings of that trauma, even if it means killing the third energy that is being given birth to in the relationship, which is the most beautiful innocence and creation of life imaginable. Now, this in itself creates a new grief, a new wound. This is the wound and the deep sadness of the murder that we commit to the most precious parts of ourselves and what we are becoming, in order to sacrifice it on the altar of protecting the wound. This becomes a new wound. This is the pit, the deep pit of despair and grief, when we understand that every single thing that we hold most dear is being sacrificed on the altar of the defense strategy to protect the wound. And at some point, usually after age 50, we start to reevaluate our loyalty to the wound and the defense strategy. And if we are fortunate, we start to become ourselves more. And we are willing to betray the defense strategy and the wound in order to give birth to something beautiful. We are, in some cases, able to reach a state of transcendence. There's a lovely Romulan series in the Next Generation, or Next Generation Star Trek, was an issue about a Romulan defector, a classic general that wanted his granddaughters to be able to have a peaceful world, and so wanted to avoid a major bloodshed, and was betrayed, and this, that, and the other. And this is the tension between what is most beautiful in us and what we give up on the altar of the wound. But this is the altar of our deep bloodshed, our deepest pains, and this is the biggest reason relationships don't work. Now, this betrayal can happen through addiction, through alcoholism, etc., the commitment to not feeling the pain. But it's important to understand why. Once we're dealing with trauma, we're dealing with biology. Once we understand that biology is stronger than consciousness, it is consciousness, but it's in a denser form. So the fight, flight, freeze reaction is stronger than consciousness, meaning that if we ignore it, we may fry our biology with chronic fatigue, with adrenal collapse, with this and that and the other. So we must respect the biological nature and understand what it is that is creating our trauma. Create a safe enough space to heal that trauma. And we must go through the trauma healing protocol effectively to a point where we are no longer afraid in a life and death sense about discovering the wound, about talking about the wound, about feeling it, that we can be empathic and compassionate with those who still are afraid of discovering, of owning and feeling and healing the wound. And we can stop hurting ourselves in order, and hurting our partner and hurting the third energy that is created in the partnership. We can stop doing that because the defense strategy to protect ourselves from the pain of the wound is no longer needed, because the wound has been given back to where it came from. It has been rejected from our energetic field, thus healing massive amounts of pain that no longer need to be dissociated. Now, as we welcome ourselves home back from this long journey into the netherland of cult isolation and loneliness, as we welcome ourselves back from our journey, there is no compulsion. That's the key, that trauma has been healed. There is no compulsion to eat, to addict, to work endless hours, to do all the things that we use to stand between you and me as core and beautiful energies. There's no more addiction. And we are reconnected with our source, with the fabric of all that is. And psychedelics can play a very beautiful role when honored in a very sacred place around this, because they take us to a point in ourselves, if we are blessed, that is pre-wound, where we can see who we truly are. And it's absolutely beautiful. Thanks for going on this little exploration.